Up next in the broadcast, the streets turn angry in Ferguson, Missouri after a grand jury decides not to indict a white police officer who shot to death an unarmed black teenager. U.S. President Barack Obama asks for calm. Also in the United States, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel steps down amid reports that he differed with administration officials on the response to Islamic State militant threats. He stays in office until the Senate confirms his replacement. Korea's Constitutional Court hears the closing arguments in the case against the Unified Progressive Party to decide whether to disband the left-leaning group over allegations of conspiring with North Korea. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Hwang Sung-hee.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us tonight. We begin over in Washington, where U.S. President Barack Obama faces his first cabinet shuffle since his party was defeated in the midterm elections earlier this month.
Defense Chief Chuck Hagel stepped down from his post on Monday, Washington time. Choi Yoo-sun has more on the resignation.
It's been the greatest privilege of my life. The greatest privilege of my life to lead and, most important, to serve with the men and women of the Defense Department and support their families.
The U.S. Defense Secretary's resignation on Monday is the Obama administration's first cabinet shakeup after the Democratic Party suffered crushing losses in midterm elections a few weeks ago. Praising Hagel's ability to balance defense reforms at home and addressing external security challenges, President Obama, however, did not mention the specifics that led to his departure.
Now, last month, Chuck came to me to discuss the final quarter of my presidency and determined that, having guided the department through this transition, it was an appropriate time for him to complete his service.
When the former Republican senator and Vietnam War veteran was appointed to head the Pentagon nearly 2 years ago, he was tasked with bringing home troops from Afghanistan and Iraq and slashing the defense budget. Since then, Washington's military policies have shifted in response to growing security threats from Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. Reports had emerged of a rift between Hagel and the administration on the U.S. strategy against the extremist group. Analysts suggest Hagel may have been the fall guy as the Republicans, now in control of both congressional houses, are expected to scrutinize the administration's foreign policies. Hagel will stay in his role until his successor is named and confirmed by the Senate. Some possible candidates include Michelle Flournoy, a former Undersecretary of Defense, and former Deputy Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
Officials from Iran and 6 world powers, including the U.S. and Germany, have agreed on a second extension to their deadline. Both parties said significant progress was made over Tehran's nuclear program, but apparently not enough to reach a deal this time around. Shin Se-min has the story.
A new deadline has been set for a deal over Tehran's nuclear capabilities after negotiations to reach a comprehensive agreement in Vienna failed. Iran and 6 world powers, including the U.S., Britain, and Germany, have decided instead to give themselves an additional 7 months to hammer out an agreement. The two sides have been discussing the terms of Tehran scaling back its nuclear program in exchange for easing Western sanctions that have hurt the Iranian economy. They will reconvene in December to pick up where they left off. Iranian leader Hassan Rouhani said most gaps had been removed through the talks, while U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the discussions had been difficult.
These talks aren't going to suddenly get easier just because we extend them. We believe a comprehensive deal that addresses the world's concerns is possible. It is desirable.
A temporary nuclear agreement that mandates Iran avoid sensitive nuclear activities gives Tehran access to some $700 million of its assets per month and lets it continue with its nuclear-related research and development. The major sticking points in a permanent agreement appear to center on what sanctions would be lifted and how much uranium Iran would be allowed to enrich. The West has long believed that Tehran has designs on building nuclear weapons. Iran insists its nuclear program is intended solely to diversify its energy sources. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
North Korea and Russia will hold a joint ceremony next year to celebrate milestones in their respective histories. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Tuesday that the regime will commemorate the 70th anniversary of independence from Japan's colonial rule, while Russia will mark the 70th anniversary of victory in Second World War. The report stressed progress in bilateral ties between the two countries following Special Envoy Choi Ryong-ha's recent trip to Moscow. It added the two sides agreed there must be no preconditions to the resumption of the long-stalled six-party nuclear talks, which includes the two Koreas, the U.S., China, and Russia.
Korea's Constitutional Court listened to the closing arguments in the case against the Unified Progressive Party, which is being accused of conspiring with North Korea in a plot to overthrow the South Korean government. If the case goes through, it would be the first time in Korean history that a political party may be forced to be disbanded by the government. Our Ji Myung-gil has more on the landmark ruling.
The Constitutional Court on Tuesday heard closing arguments in a trial that will ultimately determine whether the minor opposition Unified Progressive Party will be forced to disband over accusations it had plans to overthrow the government. Justice Minister Hwang Kyo-an, speaking on behalf of the state, told the court that the UPP based itself on a political doctrine that violated South Korea's constitutional order. He claimed the party's political objective was to instigate a rebellion against the government and achieve a federal form of unification with Pyongyang. Chief of the UPP, Lee Jung-hee, countered and defended her party before the court, saying it had no affiliation whatsoever with North Korea and that the government was guilty of political suppression. The accusations date back to last year when lawmaker Lee Seok-gi and 3 UPP members were arrested on charges of plotting to topple the South Korean government and blow up major government facilities in the event of a war with the North. They are still awaiting a Supreme Court ruling on those charges. The Constitutional Court did not decide when they will deliver the ruling to determine whether the UPP will be allowed to continue on as an official party. If they are forced to disband, it will mark a first in Korean history. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye underscored her pledge that stamping out corruption was a priority and was non-negotiable. Speaking at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning, her comments came one day after the government launched a government-wide investigation team composed of police, prosecutors, state auditors, and taxation officials to look into recent corruption scandals involving the defense industry. In particular, it is looking into ties between the defense industry and the private sector. In one case revealed last week by police, a local firm earned more than $1 million by selling second-hand parts to the Navy between 2009 and 2013 as if they were brand new. More than a dozen people have already been booked on corruption charges in that case.
The OECD has cut its growth outlook for Korea next year by nearly half a percentage point to 3.8%. The Paris-based think tank says that the Korean economy is gradually picking up, with its output projected to grow at around 4% annually over 2015 and 2016 on the back of the government's stimulus measures and expansionary monetary policies. It said, however, that the country's mounting household debt, prompted by government measures to boost the housing market, could constrain private consumption. The OECD also cut the growth outlook for the global economy by 0.2 percentage points to 3.7%. A local state-run think tank says Korea may experience a long-term economic slump similar to one Japan faced in the 1990s, as Asia's fourth-largest economy is showing signs of deflation. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
There's fears Korea could be taking the same deflationary path as its neighbor Japan, which experienced a 10-year economic slump. Lee Dae-jun, an economist at the Korea Development Institute, pointed to Korea's falling prices and low inflation rates as the main reasons for drawing the comparison. The country's consumer prices remain trapped in the 1% range for a full 2 years due to low demand, recording well below the government's target of 2.5 to 3.5%. It's a dismal sign as sluggish demand was attributed as the main reason for deflation. In Japan's case, in the early 1990s, dragging down the country's real estate prices and its GDP deflator, which measures the prices of all domestically produced goods. Much like Japan, Korea's GDP deflator increases are dipping low into the 0% range this year after it first started to decline in 2011. The researcher warns Seoul should be more vigilant and take preemptive measures to tackle the country's low inflation rate, such as cutting its main benchmark interest rates. He adds it's important Seoul takes into account the downward trend of real wages and expected inflation when making decisions on its monetary policies. In 1995, Tokyo lowered its policy interest rate by 0.5% to turn the economy around from recession, but the effect was short-lived as the country's real interest rate went up due to deflation. The Bank of Korea will announce a decision on December 11th on whether to further lower the current interest rate of 2%, following previous rate cuts in August and October. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Korea's snowballing household debt has hit another high. The Bank of Korea says the amount of household debt, which refers to credit purchases and loans extended by financial institutions, stood at roughly $950 billion as of the end of September. That's up around $20 billion from the end of June. The record debt stems from the government's deregulation drive in the housing sector and a lowered key interest rate, which worked in tandem to boost housing loans. Burdened by the demands of child-rearing, more women in the nation are choosing not to work. The latest figures show more Korean women choosing to stay at home instead of being economically active. Our Lee Ji-yoon has more on the gap between Korea and the OECD average.
Getting married, giving birth, and raising children all seem to be keeping Korean women from working. In its latest report, the Korea Economic Research Institute compared the country's economic activity rate to that of 7 OECD member countries. The economic activity rate measures the proportion of the working-age population who are working or are available for work or training. The 7 leading OECD countries, which include the United States and Japan, all have populations of more than 10 million and an average employment rate of 70%. For Korean women between the ages of 25 and 54, the institute says the economic activity rate stood at about 63%. Compare that to the average of 76.2% for the 7 OECD countries, and you have an over 13 percentage point difference. The employment rate for women in Korea wasn't any better. A little over 60% of them are currently employed, while the average employment rate for Korea's 7 OECD counterparts was nearly 72%. While women in Korea are struggling to stay in the job market, the employment rate for Korean men was actually a bit higher than that of the 7 OECD countries' average. Older people in Korea also seem to be working more than ever as the country's aging population is growing. Korea's economic activity rate, as well as the employment rate for people aged 65 or older, was more than double the average for the 7 OECD countries. Experts say the government needs to introduce a more flexible work system for women, so they're willing and able to work even after having a child. They add reducing the wage gap with men might also help, while also lowering the cost for marriage and childbirth. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
There's a new kid on the block eyeing Korea's hold on the information and communications technology sector. Latest report from the International Telecommunications Union says Denmark edged out Korea from the top place by 0.01 points with a score of 8.86. Korea has been ranked atop the ICT Development Index of 166 countries for 3 straight years. The index measures a country's level of ICT access, use, and ability. Sweden was ranked 3rd, followed by Iceland and Britain. The report adds that more than 3 billion people are currently connected online and estimates the figure to more than double by the end of this year. Public transportation in Seoul is getting a little bit more animated. Starting today, you'll find Korea's popular animation character Pororo decorated on a set number of cabs running in Seoul. Connie Lee tells us more.
Pororo, the little penguin with his yellow helmet and orange goggles, is now coming to you in taxis. Starting Tuesday, 20 of these so-called Pororo taxis are running on the streets of Seoul. From the outer decorations to inner car accessories, Pororo and his friends have taken over these cars, much to the delight of Korean children. No wonder Pororo is also deemed the children's president. Passengers can ride with this popular animation character for a test period until May of next year.
We came up with this idea when we were thinking about how to increase people's use of taxis, even if it's only by a little bit.
The fares for these Pororo taxis are the same as other regular taxis in Seoul, and because there are only a handful available, reservations can be made online. Pororo is just the latest animated TV character to be featured on public transportation in the capital. Tayo, the little bus, has been literally running the streets of Seoul since March, and with its huge popularity, the one-month test term has been extended until the end of this year. And the larva character is plastered all over a train on Seoul's subway line 2, entertaining the eyes of passengers since the beginning of this month. Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon says the coming of life of these characters is a way to decorate the city. And of course, please the little ones. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Violent protests have broken out in the U.S. state of Missouri after a grand jury decided not to press criminal charges against a white policeman for killing an unarmed black teenager.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot dead 3 months ago, but tensions have now soared to an all-time high.
That's right. Shortly after the announcement on Monday, angry protesters poured into the streets shouting, "No justice, no peace." The situation turned violent as mass riots and clashes with police spread across the town of Ferguson. Meanwhile, thousands of people have been peacefully rallying in cities such as Los Angeles, New York, and Washington to protest this highly charged case. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the story.
Angry protesters roamed the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. Stores are looted and burned down. Police retaliate by firing tear gas and flashbangs. This was the scene shortly after it was announced that a grand jury had decided not to indict police officer Darren Wilson, who is white, in the shooting death of Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, an incident that set off weeks of demonstrations over the summer.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
Shortly after the announcement, there were reports of gunshots fired, looting, and clashes with police. U.S. President Barack Obama, in response to the grand jury's decision, called on people to remain calm.
First and foremost, we are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. But I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully.
Brown's family said they were profoundly disappointed by the jury's decision, but they asked people to channel their frustration in ways that will make a positive difference. The decision comes amid long-standing racial tensions in a predominantly black city, where white people are dominant in the power structure. The grand jury that decided against indicting Darren Wilson was made up of 9 white and 3 black members. They began meeting in late August, shortly after the incident, and heard evidence provided by the prosecution, as well as eyewitness accounts of the altercation that left 18-year-old Michael Brown dead. Brown's family lawyer says the teen was not resisting when he was shot and killed by police officer Wilson. Wilson's supporters say he opened fire in self-defense. Ahead of the grand jury's decision, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon declared a 30-day state of emergency and called up 400 National Guard troops to the area. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And turning now to Hong Kong, police have arrested over 30 pro-democracy protesters refusing to comply with a court order to clear out from one of the main protest sites. Clashes broke out when the group tried to block government workers who were taking down barricades in the Mong Kok district. Despite the police action, many demonstrators remain defiant in their fight for fully free elections.
Even if the authorities clear this place, our conviction to fight for real universal suffrage will not change. So even if they can clear the space, personally, I think it will only inspire people to think of other ways to continue this movement.
Local media say a separate court order has been granted to clear out even a larger part of the Mong Kok area on Wednesday. And shifting to East Africa, another major health threat has broken out on the continent, this time in the form of a deadly plague. The World Health Organization says the bacterial disease has killed at least 40 people out of nearly 120 confirmed cases since last August, including 2 in the capital city. The Prime Minister of Madagascar, Kolo Christophe Rogers, said on Monday that measures to prevent further infections were being launched.
The WHO report was done with the consent of the government, as is the norm, and it is very necessary. Every case of this disease has been confirmed and declared as required by the WHO, and hence this is considered an epidemic.
According to the WHO, the last previously known outbreak of this form of bubonic plague appeared in Peru in 2010. And finally, the piano at the center of the classic film Casablanca has been sold at auction in New York for $3.4 million. The instrument was among the hundreds of pieces of memorabilia up for auction from Hollywood's golden age. Casablanca was released back in 1942. It's since been ranked the second greatest movie of all time by the American Film Institute, alongside Citizen Kane and The Godfather. The auctioned-off piano is best known in the scene where actress Ingrid Bergman delivered the famous line, "Play it, Sam, play as time goes by."
Not tonight no more.
And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen Che with a look at sports. Let's start with the live games on Tuesday evening. First to the matchup in the KBL. Over in Wonju, the Dongbu Promi played host to the Anyang KGC. And KGC comes to play in the first half, neutralizing Dongbu's Anthony Richardson's 17-point second quarter explosion with top-class team ball. And holding a solid lead, Osegun and company close out the fourth quarter for the big win. Meanwhile, it's Dongbu's first back-to-back loss since the third game this season. And heading to the V-League for the men's matchup between the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs and the LIG Graders in Daejeon. And an aggressive start leads to a 1-1 split, but Samsung breaks the hard-fought third set for the lead. And the fire of Samsung's furnace, Leo Martinez, blazes the competition, leading to the Blue Fangs for their 5th win in a row. And looking overseas, the 2015 Copa America group stage draw was held, and old rivalries are set to reignite next summer. Host Chile, along with Mexico, Ecuador, and Bolivia, make up Group A. But the biggest matches are anticipated between World Cup runner-up Argentina and Uruguay in Group B, and Brazil and Colombia in Group C for a rematch of the World Cup quarterfinal. Meanwhile, Paraguay and Jamaica round out Group B, and Peru and Venezuela Group C. And finally to the U.S. The latest National Baseball Hall of Fame ballot was announced, and it's a talent-rich pool of players, to say the least. The Baseball Writers Association of America will have an array of newcomers to choose from, but none are bigger than 3-time Cy Young winner Pedro Martinez, 303-game winner Randy Johnson, and the final third of the Braves pitching trio, John Smoltz. Meanwhile, 3,000 hit getter Craig Biggio is a favorite in his 3rd time on the ballot. And that wraps it up for now. Your weather's up next. See you next time.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your latest weather forecast. It was a wet day for some regions and it is still raining along the eastern coast as well as on Jeju, and more rain is in store. The coastal areas of Gangwon-do as well as both Jeollado provinces are looking at under 5 millimeters, and this should continue through tomorrow morning. Other than that, Wednesday is shaping up to be a typical late autumn day with mild numbers. And a heads up for those of you making plans for the weekend, as there is a chance of rain on Friday as well as on Sunday. Here are the readings for tomorrow. Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju hit 15. Busan reaches 16. On to other regions. Jeju makes it to 15. Dokdo hits 12. Mount Kumgang reaches 4. That's all for now. I'll be back with more after midnight.
That's primetime news for this Tuesday. I'm Hwang Sung-hee. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.